If you're like 96% of students, then you have probably felt the sweaty palms, the sense of impending doom, and the rapid heart rate that mean test anxiety. So while I probably can't cure you entirely of test anxiety, what I can do is provide you some helpful tips about how to manage it. I'm Melissa with PrepScholar, and PrepScholar is a leading test prep website that includes not only articles about every conceivable topic you can think of with regard to test and college preparation, we also have a customized tutor program that scales to your exact needs and that can include one-on-one tutoring time if you need it. And you can learn more about all of that at PrepScholar.com. While you're here, consider taking a moment to subscribe. Right down there, there's a big red button that says subscribe in it. Take advantage of that. That's going to give you updates on all of the videos that we're posting and make sure that you see them first. While you're down there, consider leaving me a comment about how you personally fight test anxiety. How do you relax? How do you make the most of your study time? Let me know. So before we get into how to beat test anxiety, we should first learn what test anxiety is. So the first thing you need to know is that test anxiety is not weird, it's not something to be ashamed of, it's actually super common. As I mentioned in the introduction, something like 96% of people experience test anxiety at some point in their life. Another important thing to remember is that test anxiety causes real physiological symptoms. It's not something that you can just talk yourself out of. It's something that causes your body to respond in a particular way because your brain is almost telling you that you have something that you should be really afraid of, so it's kicking your body into fight or flight mode. Those physiological responses can be everything from the sweaty palms and the increased heart rate to decreased concentration, and even in like the super long term, it can cause memory impairment. So all of that sounds pretty terrible. So if you're anything like me, you're probably now feeling a little bit stressed about how much you stress. But the thing to remember is that stress and anxiety can be managed, and with preparation and understanding, you are better equipped to make the most of your test time, and you'll find that you have an easier time managing your anxiety before your tests. And just as a side note, younger people in particular are way better at repairing the neural pathways that may be impacted by long-term stress and long-term anxiety, so just keep that in mind. Your body's going to be okay. And seriously, don't worry about it too much, because worrying about worrying is what causes these things in the first place, so just try to relax if you can. So that brings us to what you can do about stress, and more specifically, what you can do about test anxiety. So let's get into it. So the first major step to preventing test anxiety and managing test anxiety is to prepare early. And I know at this point you've heard this 10,000 times before, maybe from one of my SAT prep videos, maybe from any of the other numerous test prep videos that are out there. But seriously, get started early. Naturally, the closer you are to your test date, the more stressed out you're going to be. If you start early, you can spread that amount of stress out over days, over weeks, months, even years if you get a really good head start. And the thing is, if you start late, you're going to end up cramming, and it's that cramming that causes problems. No matter where you are in your high school education, there are things that you can do to help prevent test stress. And yes, that includes if your test is tomorrow. A lot of people are tempted to do last-minute cramming. So you study really hard right before the test because you're trying to get everything into your brain so that it's fresh, right? The problem is that that approach really doesn't work. A good refresher can be great, but trying to cram everything in there at once right before the test is just generally not a good study tactic. Instead, you can ask yourself questions like, how much time do you have before your test? And how many things do you need to study? And then you can plan your practice around that rather than trying to cram it all in at the last minute. Say, for example, that you need to study 3 different subjects. So that's 3 subjects. We'll say your test is in 24 hours and you're going to have 8 hours sleep. So that leaves you about 13 hours unless you have school, in which case, yes, it will be significantly diminished. So again, get started as soon as you can. And that equates to about 4 hours for each subject, minus some time for breaks and that kind of thing. 4 hours for each subject is actually a decent amount of time. It's maybe not enough to teach yourself everything if you haven't studied before, but it is a good amount of time to get a sort of handle on it. You can do a lot of practice problems, you can do a lot of self-teaching in 4 hours. The important thing is that you can build a solid foundation and that you can prioritize which skills you need versus which ones you don't need, and build your practice around that rather than trying to cram everything in at the last possible second. If you're unsure where you need to begin because maybe you just kind of put off studying, we're going to wing it until the last second you got really nervous, then it's time to think about your strengths and weaknesses as a student. And all of this also applies if you still have months left to study. Say you need to study 6 different subjects, you have 2 months left until your test. When you divide that up, you end up with about 3 subjects per month, or 1 subject per week. Obviously, we have a little bit left over. So if you break that down and you spend an hour a day studying each subject, then you have ended up with not only 7 hours studying each thing, but also you've ended up with some spare time so you can go back and brush up on stuff that maybe you need a little more help with. That prioritizing is everything, and giving yourself some extra room will mean that you can always revisit the skills that you were struggling with. So step number 2 is going to be to take care of yourself. And if you think back to my last example, you'll notice that I said that you got a full 8 hours sleep, and I meant it. Yes, you would theoretically have more time to study if you didn't get 8 hours of sleep. So say you slept 6 hours or 3 hours or no hours. But it's important to remember that the average teenager needs like 9 hours of sleep to be fully functioning, and most people probably aren't getting that. If you're not getting that, there's a strong chance that you're experiencing things like kind of like a foggy memory, or you could be experiencing impaired concentration or forgetfulness or even anxiety. The downside to this, of course, is that anxiety in turn can make it difficult to sleep because your mind is just running over and over and over every possible thing that could go wrong. So because anxiety can make it hard to sleep, you're going to want to put in an extra good effort to train yourself to sleep well. And that can mean things like taking some time to relax before bed. You can take some time to meditate if that's your thing, or do yoga, or go for a run, or even just turn off your screens an hour before bed. There's actually studies that have shown that our exposure to blue light from cell phones and from computer screens can disrupt our circadian rhythm and make it more difficult to sleep. So if that's a concern for you, then really turn off your devices an hour before bed. Other things you should be doing include eating full, balanced meals, drinking lots of water, and getting exercise. And I know all of those things sound like they're not super related to test prep, and it seems weird to mention them. But here's the thing. Your brain is a part of your body, and if you want your brain to be healthy, you also need to nourish your body. And that doesn't mean that you need to go out and immediately join a gym and start drinking a gallon of water, none of that kind of thing. You can take little steps like jogging to the mailbox or replacing the soda that you usually have with lunch with a glass of water. These little steps build up and they mean a lot, particularly when you turn them into good habits in the months before test prep. If you can't do months before test prep, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you should just give up on it entirely. Eat well the night before, eat well the day of, and make sure that your body is really fueled and ready for your test. My third tip is to take breaks. This is gonna sound weird or counterintuitive because obviously if you're crunched for time, if you're feeling stressed, you're gonna wanna get stuff over as quickly as you can. But taking breaks is actually essential to maintaining your concentration. So if you're deep into studying and you've got 2 hours ahead of you where you're like, I'm gonna do nothing but study, it's actually good to take some time away from studying. It doesn't have to be 15 minutes, it doesn't have to be a half hour. You can just get up for 5 minutes and stretch, take a little walk around the room, go pet your dog, something like that. All of that is good for kind of breaking this zombie-like momentum that we get into as we're working on a project, including studying. I found one of the best ways to remind myself to take breaks is to set timers. So I have a couple ways I personally do this. One of them is the Pomodoro technique. This is when you work for 25 minutes and then after 25 minutes you take a 5-minute break, and this kind of gives you a moment to step away from the activity, refresh your mind, and then come back to it without losing too much time or too much momentum. Your brain needs breaks to recharge. You don't have to bring your flashcards to the dinner table. You don't need to be running over equations while you're taking a shower. You can. I'm not saying you can't, just saying you don't have to. It is okay, and not just okay, it is good to take a little bit of a break to let your mind recharge. Yes, even if your test is tomorrow. So all of those tips might seem a little general, and that's because test anxiety, like any form of anxiety and like most forms of stress, doesn't necessarily come from anything that's real or tangible. We often feel them whether or not they have any basis. No matter how many practice tests you take, no matter how good your scores are, if you experience test anxiety, you're probably still going to be feeling like you're not quite ready, no matter how much time that you have prepared. An anxious brain is always going to find a way to make us feel like we don't stand a chance. And that's why it's important to do everything in our power, which means planning, which means taking care of our bodies, which means taking breaks, to fight that urge. Because the thing is, we can't convince our brains to stop screaming fire when there's no fire. Instead, we have to find ways to mitigate that and ways to instead kind of combat our brain's tendency to go in that direction. And that means taking good care of ourselves. That means working in advance. That means planning ahead. All of those things factor into kind of giving us something to fall back on when our brains start, going down that road of getting really worked up about something they don't need to be that worked up about. You don't need to entirely change your life in order to combat test anxiety. Taking little steps, even if your test is tomorrow, is going to be the way to kind of ease the process of taking tests. You can look at your mistakes on past tests, you can make sure you're drinking enough water, you can make sure that at night before you go to sleep that you're good and tired. You're not just like, well, I probably should go to bed now, but you've taken an hour off, you maybe went for a jog beforehand, so you're super ready for bed. All those small steps make you better prepared to fight test anxiety. You can also just brush up on your studying strategies. Down in the description box below, I'm putting links to a whole bunch of information about studying strategies, different tips, especially for specific tests like the SAT or ACT. Up in the corner there, I'm going to have a link to our ACT prep. Just click through to our channel and you can find both SAT and ACT prep strategies. If you're looking for something a little more intense, we also have a customized tutoring program that scales to your exact needs as a student. You can find that at PrepScholar.com, and you can even get one-on-one tutoring if you feel like you need that little extra boost. Thanks for watching, and please do like and subscribe this video if you find it helpful, and take a moment down in the comments to let me know how you prepare for tests and how you combat test anxiety, because you never know who else might be helped by your advice.